The heart monitor's steady beeping was the only sound breaking the silence of the intensive care unit. I should have been celebrating my 28th birthday, but instead, I was watching the life drain from my adoptive father's eyes after the car accident that left both him and my mother paralyzed. "Amelia," he whispered, his voice barely audible through the oxygen mask. We never wanted to be a burden." I squeezed his weathered hand, the same hand that had taught me to ride a bicycle, helped with homework, and worked 3 jobs to pay for my college tuition. "You could never be a burden, Dad." That night, as I sat in the hospital corridor, something extraordinary happened. A warmth spread through my chest, and suddenly, memories that weren't mine flooded my consciousness. Images of a previous life, a life where I had been born into the Wellington family, one of the wealthiest dynasties in the country. In that first life, I had been Amelia Wellington, heir to a billion-dollar empire. I remembered the cold marble floors of our mansion, the distant conversations with parents who saw me as a business asset, and the suffocating weight of expectations. I had died at 32 in a helicopter crash, bitter and alone, having pushed away everyone who truly cared about me in pursuit of my parents' approval. But this second life had been different. At age 3, after a mix-up at the hospital, I had been raised by the Thompsons, a humble couple who couldn't have children of their own. Margaret Thompson was a seamstress and Robert worked at the local hardware store. They had given me something my biological parents never could: unconditional love. The irony wasn't lost on me. While I lived modestly with the Thompsons, my birth parents, Victoria and Harrison Wellington, had spent 25 years searching for their kidnapped daughter. They had hired private investigators, offered rewards, and never stopped believing I was alive. 3 weeks after the accident, they found me. I was spoon-feeding soup to my adoptive mother when the doorbell rang. Margaret couldn't move anything below her neck anymore, and every meal was a careful, patient process. Robert was in his wheelchair nearby, doing physical therapy exercises with rubber bands. "I'll get it," I said, wiping Margaret's chin gently. Standing on our modest front porch were 2 people I recognised instantly from my recovered memories, Victoria and Harrison Wellington. They looked exactly as I remembered, though now in their 60s. Victoria's perfectly styled blonde hair caught the afternoon sunlight, and Harrison's expensive suit looked absurdly out of place in our middle-class neighbourhood. "Amelia?" Victoria's voice trembled. "Amelia Wellington?" Behind them stood a private investigator and 2 lawyers, all carrying briefcases and wearing expressions of barely contained excitement. "I think you have the wrong person," I said calmly, though my heart was racing. Harrison stepped forward, pulling out his phone. "The DNA test confirms it. You're our daughter. You were taken from the hospital 25 years ago by..." He glanced toward the living room where my parents sat. These people, I said, my voice hardening, "are my parents." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "Sweetheart, we've been looking for you your entire life. Do you have any idea what we've been through? The sleepless nights, the false leads, the heartbreak." "Mom, who's at the door?" Margaret called weakly from inside. I turned to look at her. This woman who had read me bedtime stories, bandaged my scraped knees, and worked overtime to buy me a prom dress. Then I looked back at the Wellingtons, who had everything money could buy except the ability to truly love their child. "I know exactly who you are," I said finally. "And I know exactly who I am. I'm Amelia Thompson, and I'm not going anywhere." Harrison's expression shifted from hopeful to confused. "I don't think you understand. We're offering you everything. Your rightful inheritance, a place in our company, a life of luxury. You could have anything you want." "I already have everything I want." Victoria stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Amelia, please. We're your real parents. These people, they stole you from us. They've kept you from your true family, your real life. My real life is taking care of the people who actually raised me. But they're... Harrison gestured dismissively toward the house. They're nobody. We can provide for them better than you ever could. We'll put them in the finest care facility money can buy. That's when I truly understood how little had changed from my first life. The Wellingtons still saw people as problems to be solved with money, relationships, as transactions to be managed. Get off my property, I said quietly. Amelia, be reasonable, Victoria pleaded. At least hear us out, come have dinner with us. See the life you could have. I said, get off my property. The private investigator stepped forward. Miss Wellington, we have legal options. These people technically kidnapped you. We could... If you threaten my family, I interrupted, I will make your lives very difficult. I may not have your money yet, but I have something more valuable. I know exactly who you really are. They left, but Victoria turned back one last time. We're not giving up on you, Amelia. You're our daughter, and we're going to save you from this poverty. I closed the door and leaned against it, breathing heavily. Who were those people, honey? Robert asked as I returned to the living room. I looked at my real parents, paralyzed, dependent on me for everything, but still more concerned about my well-being than their own discomfort. Nobody important, Dad. Nobody important at all. But I knew they would be back. The Wellingtons didn't understand the word no, especially when it came to something they considered their property. And in their minds, I was their most valuable asset, not their daughter but their heir. Over the next few days, the gifts started arriving. Expensive flowers, jewellery, designer clothes, all with notes begging me to reconsider. Victoria called 17 times in one day. Harrison sent his assistant to offer me a transition package of $50,000 just to have coffee with them. I threw everything away and blocked their numbers. Then, the real pressure began. The eviction notice arrived on a Tuesday morning, stamped with the logo of Wellington Properties. I stared at the legal document in disbelief as Margaret watched from her hospital bed, which we'd moved to the living room. 30 days, I read aloud. Failure to pay rent, increase from $800 to $8,000 monthly. Robert wheeled himself closer. That's impossible. We've lived here for 22 years. Mrs. Chen has been our landlord since... Not anymore. I flipped to the second page. Wellington Properties purchased this entire block last week. New ownership, new terms. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Where will we go? The medical equipment, the ramps Robert built... I crumpled the notice in my fist. The Wellingtons had declared war. My phone buzzed. Victoria's voice was sickeningly sweet. Hello, darling. I heard about your housing situation. These things happen when you don't have proper financial backing. One phone call from me could fix everything. You did this. I'm trying to help you see reason. Come home, Amelia. Your real home. I hung up and immediately called Mrs. Chen, our elderly former landlord. I'm sorry, Amelia, she said, her voice shaking. They offered me 3 times what the property was worth. My grandson needs surgery, and I couldn't say no. They promised they'd be good to you. That afternoon, I researched Wellington Properties' recent acquisitions. They had bought 17 properties in our neighbourhood in the past week. Every business where I worked part-time, the medical supply company that provided Robert's wheelchair, even the small grocery store where Margaret used to buy ingredients for her homemade cookies. The message was clear. Submit, or watch everyone around me suffer. By evening, the pressure intensified. The physical therapist called to cancel Margaret's sessions. Wellington Medical Group had bought the clinic and restructured their patient list. The pharmacy refused to fill Robert's pain medication, new insurance policies from their parent company. I don't understand, Robert said, wincing as he tried to adjust his position. Everything's changing so fast. I held his hand, remembering my past life knowledge of Wellington business tactics. They specialised in creating dependency, then exploiting it. In my first life, I had watched them destroy competitors by buying out their suppliers, customers, and even employees. It's going to be okay, Dad. I promise. That night, I made a decision that would have horrified my past self. I broke into the Wellington mansion. Security hadn't changed much in 25 years. I remembered every camera angle, every guard rotation, every blind spot from when I'd snuck out as a teenager. The staff quarters had the same loose window latch. I slipped through the kitchen and up the servants' staircase to Harrison's study. Moonlight illuminated the room where I'd once begged for my father's attention, where he'd told me business always came before family. His computer password was still Victory 1999, the year Wellington Corporation went public. Some things never changed. I spent 2 hours copying files, financial records, and email correspondence. What I found made my stomach turn. The Wellingtons hadn't just bought properties to pressure me, they were planning to demolish the entire neighbourhood for a luxury development project called Wellington Gardens. Families who had lived there for decades would be displaced. The community centre where kids learned to read would become a boutique shopping plaza. The small hospital where Robert received treatment would be replaced by an exclusive wellness spa. But the most damning evidence was in Victoria's private emails. She had hired investigators to dig up dirt on the Thompsons, looking for any legal vulnerability. She'd contacted social services, claiming I was being held against my will by mentally unstable individuals. She had even reached out to my former colleagues, offering them money to convince me that my adoptive parents were manipulating me. The cruelest part was her correspondence with a luxury assisted living facility. She had already put down a deposit for 2 elderly patients and specifically requested they be placed in separate wings to minimise their ability to conspire against family reunification. She was planning to separate Margaret and Robert after 43 years of marriage. I printed everything and slipped back out into the night. The next morning, I walked into Wellington Corporation's headquarters wearing my best dress, a simple blue one Margaret had sewn for my college graduation. The receptionist recognised me immediately. My resemblance to Victoria was unmistakable. "Miss Wellington," she stammered, "your parents aren't expecting—" "That's fine. I'll wait." 20 minutes later, Harrison and Victoria emerged from the elevator, their faces lighting up with hope. "Amelia," Victoria rushed toward me. "You came. I knew you'd see reason." "I want to talk," I said simply. Harrison beamed. "Of course. Let's go to my office. We have so much to discuss. Your position in the company, your inheritance, your future." In his office, they settled across from me like vultures eyeing prey. Victoria pulled out a thick folder. "I've prepared everything," she said. "Trust fund access, a penthouse apartment, a car, and of course, we've arranged excellent care for those people who raised you." "You mean the care facility, where you were planning to separate them?" Their smiles faltered slightly. I placed the printed emails on Harrison's desk. Wellington Gardens development project, bribes to city officials, plans to force out elderly residents, and this. I slid Victoria's correspondence forward. "Your plan to split up a couple who's been married longer than I've been alive." Victoria's face went white. "How did you— In my first life, you taught me that information is power, knowledge is leverage. Isn't that right, Harrison?" Harrison's eyes narrowed. "Your first life?" I leaned back in my chair, completely calm. 25 years ago, you lost a daughter, but you also gained something much more valuable, the perfect excuse to be ruthless. Every hostile takeover, every family business you destroyed, every community you gentrified, you justified it all by claiming you were protecting your interests in case your daughter ever returned. "You don't know what you're talking about," Victoria whispered. "Wellington Gardens will displace 847 families. Your development will destroy a neighborhood where the average resident has lived for 32 years. You're not trying to save me. You're trying to erase the life that made me happy. Harrison stood up. You're our daughter. Everything we've built is for you. No, I said, gathering the papers. Everything you've built is for yourselves. I'm just the excuse you use to sleep at night. I walked toward the door, then paused. You have 48 hours to cancel the Wellington Gardens project, restore the original rent prices, and stop harassing my family. Or these documents go to every major news outlet in the city. You can't blackmail us, Harrison snarled. We're your parents. You're my DNA donors, I replied. The people you're trying to destroy are my parents, and I will burn down everything you've built before I let you hurt them. Victoria stood up, tears streaming down her face. We love you, Amelia. Everything we've done has been out of love. I looked at her for a long moment, remembering the hollow woman from my past life who had attended charity galas, while her daughter carved herself in bathroom stalls. No, Victoria. You love the idea of me. You love what I represent to your legacy. But you've never loved me enough to let me choose my own life. I left them sitting in that cold office, surrounded by the empire they'd built on other people's misery. The war was just beginning. The Wellingtons' response came at 3 a.m. Police sirens wailed outside our house as officers pounded on the door with a warrant for my arrest, breaking and entering, theft of corporate documents, and cybercrime. This is harassment, I told Detective Rodriguez as handcuffs clicked around my wrists. Tell it to the judge, Miss Wellington. Even the police knew my real name now. Margaret sobbed as they led me away. Robert, what do we do? She's all we have. From the patrol car, I watched my father attempt to wheel himself to the door, his arms shaking with effort. The sight broke something inside me. At the station, Victoria waited in the lobby wearing a black coat and her most sympathetic expression. This doesn't have to continue, she said as they processed me. Come home and all charges disappear. I'd rather rot in jail. But Harrison had covered every angle. The bail was set at $200,000, exactly the amount in the Thompson savings account, money they'd set aside for medical emergencies. I spent the night in a cell, thinking about my past life. As Amelia Wellington, I had used the same tactics against business rivals. I knew their playbook because I had written half of it. The next morning, a woman I didn't recognise posted my bail. Who are you? I asked as we walked out together. Rebecca Chen, Mrs. Chen's daughter. I'm a lawyer. She handed me her card. My mother told me what happened. The way the Wellingtons forced her to sell, threatened my son's medical care when she hesitated. I've been waiting years for a chance to take them down. This isn't your fight. It became my fight when they hurt my family to get to you. Rebecca drove me home, where I found Robert collapsed beside Margaret's bed. He'd been trying to help her eat breakfast and had overexerted himself. His blood pressure medication, the one the pharmacy refused to fill, was critically needed. We have to get him to the hospital, I said, checking his pulse. Wellington Medical owns the closest emergency rooms, Rebecca reminded me. They'll delay treatment until you agree to their terms. I called an ambulance anyway. As we waited, Margaret held my hand with what little strength she had. I'm sorry, sweetheart. If we hadn't raised you, none of this would be happening. Mum, don't you dare apologise for loving me. At the hospital, we waited 4 hours in the emergency room. I watched other patients with less urgent conditions get called back while Robert's condition worsened. The message was clear: submit or watch him suffer. Finally, a doctor appeared. Miss Wellington, your father will receive immediate treatment once you sign these papers. The documents weren't medical consent forms. They were custody transfer papers declaring Robert and Margaret mentally incompetent and placing them under Wellington Medical's guardianship. You want me to sign away their rights to make their own medical decisions. We want what's best for everyone involved. I tore up the papers. Find another way to help him. Rebecca stepped forward. Under state law, you cannot withhold emergency medical treatment for payment or personal disputes. I'm recording this conversation, and if Mr. Thompson dies because of this delay, Wellington Medical will face a wrongful death lawsuit and criminal charges. The doctor's confidence wavered. Within minutes, Robert was receiving proper care. While he stabilised, Rebecca and I planned our counterattack. She had been quietly building a case against Wellington Corporation for months, documenting their predatory business practices, illegal evictions, and bribery of city officials. The problem is evidence, she explained. Everything you found proves their corruption, but it was obtained illegally. We can't use it in court. Then we don't use the courts. That afternoon, I made a decision that terrified me. I called Victoria. I want to make a deal. Her voice brightened instantly. Oh, darling, I knew you'd come to your senses. Meet me tonight at the community centre on Maple Street. Come alone, no lawyers, no security. Just you and Harrison. The community centre? That rundown place? 8 o'clock. If you want your daughter back, you'll be there. The community centre was where the Thompsons had met 43 years ago at a church social. It was where they'd brought me for story time as a child, where Margaret had taught sewing classes to immigrant women, where Robert had coached Little League despite working double shifts. It was also where Wellington Gardens would build their luxury spa. The Wellingtons arrived precisely at 8, flanked by their usual entourage despite my request. I said, come alone. Harrison gestured dismissively. These are our advisors. Any agreement needs proper legal documentation. Then there's no agreement. I started walking away. Wait! Victoria grabbed my arm. Please, Amelia, what do you want? I looked at the building around us. Peeling paint, mismatched chairs, a leaky roof that Robert had tried to fix 3 times. It wasn't much, but it had been home to hundreds of families over the decades. I want you to understand what you're trying to destroy. I led them to the wall of photographs. 40 years of community events, weddings, graduations, birthday parties. People who had built their lives in this neighbourhood, who had raised their children here, who had grown old together. See that woman? I pointed to a picture of Margaret teaching a sewing class. She spent 15 years teaching new immigrants job skills for free. And him? I showed them Robert coaching soccer. He bought equipment with his own money because the kids couldn't afford it. Victoria glanced at the photos with polite disinterest. That's very nice, dear, but you see charity work. I see parents who taught me that wealth isn't measured in bank accounts. Harrison checked his watch. Amelia, we have a helicopter waiting. Let's discuss your inheritance somewhere more appropriate. My inheritance? I laughed bitterly. Do you know what the Thompsons left me when they thought they were dying? A shoebox full of letters I wrote them in college, every report card they'd saved, and Margaret's wedding ring, the only valuable thing she owned. Sentimental trash, Harrison muttered. That's when I knew nothing had changed from my first life. They still saw love as weakness, relationships as transactions. You're right, I said quietly. It is just sentimental trash. But it's worth more than everything you've ever built. I pulled out my phone and showed them the live stream I'd been broadcasting to social media for the past 10 minutes. Say hello to 30,000 viewers. They've been watching you dismiss the community you want to destroy. Victoria's face went pale. You recorded us without consent. In a public building, that's perfectly legal. Rebecca taught me that. The comments were already pouring in. Outrage at the Wellingtons' callousness, support for the families they were displacing, and pledges to boycott Wellington businesses. You see, in my first life, I thought power came from money and fear. But in this life, I learned it comes from people who actually care about each other. Harrison's face darkened. You think social media posts will stop us? No, but this will... Rebecca stepped out from behind the community centre stage, holding a thick folder. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced to my phone camera, I'm about to read the Wellington Corporation's internal emails regarding their plans to illegally demolish this historic community centre and displace 847 families to build luxury condominiums. Rebecca's voice cut through the community centre like a blade as she read the first email aloud. Project Wellington Gardens. Phase 1. Identify vulnerable elderly residents for accelerated displacement procedures. The livestream viewer count climbed to 50,000. Harrison lunged for my phone, but I stepped back. Touch me, and assault charges will be the least of your problems. Victoria's composure finally cracked. You ungrateful little... Careful, I warned. Your true nature is showing. Rebecca continued reading. Victoria Wellington to City Planning. The $200,000 donation should ensure the community centre loses its historic protection status. The comments exploded with outrage. Local news stations began calling my phone. But Harrison wasn't finished. He pressed a button on his phone, and within seconds, men in suits surrounded the building. You want to play games, Amelia? Let's play. His smile was vicious. Those medical charges for your adoptive father just increased to $847,000. The house you're living in? Condemned for structural violations. And that lawyer helping you? Her son's surgery just got mysteriously cancelled. Rebecca's face went white, but she kept reading the emails. Harrison stepped closer to my phone camera. I'm Harrison Wellington, and I'm offering $1 million reward for information leading to the arrest of the criminals who broke into my home and stole confidential documents. I felt the trap closing around us, but I had learned something in my second life that my first life never taught me. Sometimes the only way to win is to lose everything. Rebecca, stop reading. She looked at me in confusion. But we're exposing them. I have a better idea. I addressed the camera directly. My name is Amelia Thompson, and I'm legally the daughter of Robert and Margaret Thompson. But I'm also biologically the daughter of Harrison and Victoria Wellington. The viewer count jumped to 75,000. 25 years ago, the Wellingtons lost a child due to a hospital mix-up. They've spent millions searching for her, claiming it was out of love. But I remember my first life as their daughter, and I know the truth. Victoria stepped forward. You're having a psychological break. The trauma of being separated from your real family. In my first life, Victoria gave me my first eating disorder at age 12 by commenting on my weight at a board meeting. Harrison missed my high school graduation because a business deal was more important. They sent me to boarding school at 8 because I was disrupting their schedule. The comments showed people were captivated, sharing their own stories of toxic wealthy families. But the Thompsons? I turned the camera toward the photographs on the wall. They attended every school play, cheered at every soccer game, and taught me that a person's worth isn't measured in dollars. Harrison's security team was closing in, but something unexpected happened. Community members started arriving, neighbours who had seen the live stream, families being displaced by Wellington Gardens, former employees who had been fired for refusing to participate in illegal activities. Mrs. Chen hobbled in on her walker. This girl's family saved my grandson's life. The Wellingtons destroyed it for profit. An elderly man I recognised from Robert's hardware store pushed through the crowd. Wellington Corporation fired me after 30 years because I wouldn't lie about building code violations they wanted to ignore. More people flooded in, sharing their stories on camera. The live stream became a testimonial of Wellington corruption spanning decades. But Victoria had one final card to play. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced loudly, what you're witnessing is a kidnapping victim defending her captors. Amelia has Stockholm Syndrome. She produced official documents. These papers prove that Robert and Margaret Thompson participated in a conspiracy to steal a newborn from the hospital. They are criminals, and we are the victims. The crowd murmured uncertainly. Even I felt a chill. These weren't forged documents. In their desperation to have a child, the Thompsons had indeed taken advantage of the hospital mix-up. "She's right," I said into the camera. "The Thompsons technically did take me from the hospital. But do you want to know why?" I pulled out my phone and showed Margaret's medical records, the ones I'd found years ago when applying for college financial aid. Margaret Thompson had 7 miscarriages, 7 children who died before birth. When the hospital made their mistake, a grieving couple saw it as a miracle. They took me home believing I was meant to be theirs. The crowd grew quiet. "But Victoria Wellington?" I looked directly at her. She was relieved. In my first life memories, I remember her telling Harrison that motherhood was interfering with her career trajectory. She didn't want a baby. She wanted an heir she could mould later. Victoria's face twisted with rage. "That's a lie. The hospital records show you didn't even notice I was missing for 18 hours. You were in surgery, cosmetic surgery, to remove your pregnancy weight." The live stream comments turned brutal. Victoria Wellington became a trending topic for all the wrong reasons. Harrison made one last desperate move. "I'm calling in every favour, every political connection. Your adoptive parents will be arrested, prosecuted, and imprisoned. You'll have nothing left." That's when I played my final card. "Actually, I'll have everything that matters." I pulled out a manila envelope. "These are the deeds to every property you bought in this neighbourhood, all purchased through shell companies that I happen to own." Harrison's face went blank. "That's impossible. Remember teaching me about offshore accounts and shell corporations in my first life? I've been using that knowledge. Every property Wellington Corporation bought was actually purchased by companies I created using information from my biological inheritance trust, a trust that legally became mine when I turned 25, regardless of whether I claimed my Wellington identity." The crowd erupted in cheers as understanding dawned. "I own the entire neighbourhood now, and my first act as landlord is to restore all original rents, establish a community fund for medical emergencies, and ensure this community centre remains exactly as it is." Victoria collapsed into a chair, defeated. "We've lost everything." "No," I said gently. "You've lost your daughter, but you never had her to begin with." I ended the live stream and knelt beside Robert's wheelchair as the crowd slowly dispersed. Margaret reached for my hand from her portable bed. "Are we really safe now?" she whispered. "We're home, Mum, and we're never leaving." 6 months later, Robert regained some movement in his left arm through intensive therapy. Margaret learned to paint using a mouthbrush. The Wellington Corporation filed for bankruptcy after investors pulled out following the scandal. Victoria Wellington now works as a receptionist in a small law firm, finally learning what honest work feels like. Harrison spends his time in therapy, trying to understand why his daughter chose love over money. As for me, I never claimed my Wellington inheritance. Instead, I built something better, a community where people take care of each other, where wealth is measured in relationships rather than bank accounts, and where a paralyzed couple can raise a daughter who grows up knowing she is cherished. Sometimes, the greatest inheritance isn't what you're given, it's what you choose to keep.